Hey there and welcome back to Don't Open That Door. Come along with our triumvirate of terror as we descend into darkness, hurtle into horror, and plunge into peril. If you've ever traveled through time, you're in the right place. I'm Justin, and in my opinion, a cutlass is better than a chainsaw.
I'm Nico, and in my opinion, not reciting words from the books of the dead is even better than that.
Well, I'm Dan, and whenever I read books that have demonic language in it, I skip over that part.
And we're here today to review Evil Dead 2. This was directed by Sam Raimi, starring Bruce Campbell as Ash, not from Pokemon, Sarah Berry as Annie, not Starlight, Dan Hicks as Jake, not the Snake.
Not from State Farm.
Or that. And Cassie Wesley DePaiva as Bobby Joe. True ting. And Wesley Preston Robertson as the Hand and just like a bunch of other shit in the house.
Big up.
So we start with me telling you, dear listener, that this is a requel. If you don't know what that is, it's essentially kind of a remake and sequel in one. How, you might ask? Well, listeners of the podcast, or people who've seen the first movie, know that the first movie was the story of Ash and his friends going to a cabin. The Deadites essentially attack, and the movie ends with Ash basically screaming as a spirit rushes toward him. This movie cancels all of that out, and it starts where I'm going to start now. We open with Ash and his girlfriend heading to an abandoned cabin to enjoy a romantic time together. Wink, wink. When they arrive at the cabin, Ash discovers a tape player, and he plays it. As it turns out, the tape contained a recitation of the Necronomicon, and playing the tape end up releasing some evil spirits that seek to possess people. Ash's girlfriend gets possessed, and he ends up killing her with a shovel as he then also gets possessed. And if you're following along, that's where the last movie ended. That's where this one really starts. And Dan, what happens next?
So not long after, the sun rises and Ash regains control over himself. He attempts to flee the cabin, but finds that the bridge that he came in on is now destroyed and he cannot cross. Night begins to fall, and he returns to the cabin, only to come under assault from his girlfriend's reanimated corpse, otherwise known as a Deadite. He manages to use a chainsaw to cut her up, but then his own hand gets possessed, so, naturally, he cuts it off.
Yeah, well, Nico knows about cutting off certain things. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. What happens next?
Never see me in a toxic relationship again. That's on growth, baby. Just then, though, Annie, the daughter of the archaeologist on the tape, Jake, Bobby Joe, and Ed, not from Ed, Ed, and Eddie, just regular old Ed, all enter the cabin. They think Ash killed Annie's parents, so they lock him in the basement. After listening to the tapes, though, they begin to doubt themselves, and when Annie's Deadite mom reanimates in the cellar and attacks Ash, they let him out.
Mm-hmm.
Ed then gets possessed himself and attacks. Bobby Joe runs away out into the forest, but Ash hacks Ed to pieces with an axe, defeating him. As it turns out, Annie has some missing pages of the Necronomicon, and she reveals that there is a passage to allow the evil spirits to take flesh, and another passage that sends them back in time. Jake then grabs a shotgun, tosses the pages into the cellar, where Annie's undead mom is, and forces Ash and Annie to look for Bobby Joe in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you needed to find someone in the woods, you could probably come ask me, because I'm a boss.
Nope, you wouldn't survive in the woods.
Don't test me, Dan. Not today.
What would testing that involve? Would I just, drug the both of you and bring you into the woods? Be like, all right, good luck settling this decades-long beef now? Or something? What is this?
The beef is already settled.
The beef is not
settled. I survive. You don't. It's known.
It is known, Khaleesi.
Well, as it turns out, and it is not known, Bobby Joe was already killed by some evil trees. Ash gets possessed again and attacks Jake while Annie flees back to the cabin. Jake then enters the cabin, but Annie does not look before she leaps and stabs him, thinking that he's the possessed Ash. The possessed Ash then shows up, but regains his humanity when he sees his girlfriend's necklace. Together, he and Annie attach a chainsaw to where his missing hand was, and he heads into the cellar to get the missing pages of the Necronomicon. Dan, Finish this one off.
Well, Ash actually manages to defeat Annie's deadite mother while Annie reads the first passage. She begins the second, but they come under attack from the deadite spirits, one of which possesses a massive tree. Ash fights it off while Annie finishes the second passage. She dies, but she finished the incantation, which sends Ash and his car back to the Middle Ages. The movie closes with Ash defeating a deadite in front of a group of knights. They hail him as a hero as he lets out a pained scream. The end!
Doesn't even matter.
That was good on all accounts.
Thank you.
Nico, how's this movie look?
I think this is really one of the more unique movies that I think we've seen in a while. The cinematography is playful, bordering on absolutely like some Looney Tunes shit. The actual incorporation of animation, particularly stop motion, is just completely whimsical. But then we also have some of those signature just fountains of blood. So there's a lot to see here. And while there are many things happening at once, I think it succeeds insofar as the just spectacle of it all goes.
Dan, how does this movie look?
I think it looks pretty over the top, as a lot of this movie is very over the top. But I actually really like it. It's a lot of practical effects. Like Nico said, there's a ton of fountains of blood. There's just so many different effects and eye candy going on. It's just a lot of fun. And I enjoyed it.
I agree. This movie has a ton of stop motion, like Nico said. And there's also, like Nico and Dan have said, fountains of blood and a lot of practical effects going on. In particular, I liked the gigantic tree at the very end. I thought it looked really cool. And when Ash chainsaws it in the face, I thought that was really awesome, personally. Now, in terms of sounds, Nico, tell me, what thinks you?
I want to once again sort of go back to the Looney Tunes-esque kind of vibe, because honestly, this entire time with the way in particular, the sort of like household item demons sounds, they're all, or most of them are voiced by, again, William Preston Robertson, who does a great job as a cackling maniacal evil spirit. And just hearing that while also watching it sort of like comically flex a hand and like slowly drag Ash's body over towards a butcher knife, only to then get itself knifed in, I guess, what would be its face. I don't know. It sounds very silly, and I think it is probably one of my favorite parts about the movie, if I'm honest.
I don't really have much to add about the sound. Dan, where are you at with it?
Like I said, for the visuals, a lot of the sound is over the top, which I had a blast with. The sound effects are just crazy. Like there's a point when after he shoots something, he like flips the shotgun and it's like as he like flips it, and then he like puts it in like a halter or something and it goes like when he puts in the halter, and it's just like crazy amounts of whatever. And I think Bruce Campbell completely overacts everything in this movie, and just the amount of like screaming and no and just like crazy amounts of energy and everything that he brings was just a lot of fun. And I don't even know if that's considered sound, but I'm going to put it in this part. And it was a blast.
So let's talk about the first part of the film. And by the first part, I mean like the first 10 minutes. How do you feel about the supposed requel element of the film, insofar as this movie kind of just discards the previous movie, but starts off from a very similar place to where the last movie ended? How'd you feel about that?
I thought it was fine. I mean, I guess it was kind of meta for me, maybe because I know it's a requel before watching this. This is the first time I've seen it, but I know that. So I kind of knew what to expect going in. And it's been a while since I saw the first one. So I didn't even really realize that it kind of picks up sort of where it kind of left off. And like you mentioned sort of the crossover point during the synopsis. Like I didn't even really realize that because it's just been a while since I've seen the first one. So I thought it was fine. It didn't really affect me personally.
Nico, are you standing on the same ground?
For the most part, yeah. I did think that it was a little contrived, but I guess sort of in the spirit of other things that it has done already, just by nature of being a wacky movie, I was willing to give it kind of the checkmark pass. Like, yeah, this is fine. It's not like narrative breaking enough for me to really care. So like, I don't know. There's other media that does this too. So like, I think it's fine for the most part.
Personally, I wonder if it was not all up to Sam Raimi in terms of that. So I did a little reading and I saw that the studio essentially wanted a film that was very similar to the first movie. And Sam Raimi had kind of wanted to send Ash to the Middle Ages, which is where he ends up at the end of this one. But Sam Raimi, from what I read, kind of wanted it to be more about that. And it seemed, just from my reading, no insight, it looked like maybe it was maybe a little bit of a conflict there.
Between who and what?
Between what Raimi wanted for the movie and what the studio wanted.
Interesting.
The studio wanted something that was more like the first. And Raimi kind of wanted to take it in a different direction because he'd already done the first.
Right.
Because this movie, and this is kind of one thing, it's very similar in kind of the broad scape of things, with just like everyone holed up in a cabin and getting possessed one by one.
Yeah.
Like, it's rather similar to the first. And that's kind of one thing that, comparing this to the previous movie, really sticks out, is just how similar the two are up until the end, I would say, in terms of plot structure. But Dan, compare this to the first one. What'd you think?
I don't know. I think I like this one a little bit better. Partially because I feel like this one was more clearly...
Directed?
No, I think it was more clearly fun. Not to say that the first one wasn't, but I just feel like this one they leaned so far into that. And as a viewer, I just grasped that very early on and just spent the whole movie enjoying it and having fun. Versus the first one, I remember not really knowing if it was supposed to be campy or if it was just kind of campy because of the time and the budget and everything, until part of the way through the movie. And then I was like, okay, yeah, it is, like, clearly. But I think this one just set the direction and the tone very early. And then I just was able to ride that the whole movie. That's my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Nico, compare this one to the first. What's your thoughts?
So the first one holds the title of movies that I have watched with my roommate Alex, that he says the first Evil Dead is the worst movie that we've ever reviewed, based off the ones that he's seen that we watched together. So just a little bit of interesting lore there. But personally, I like this one a little bit better. The first one was just hyper violent gore, demons, the whole shebang, and this one is too. But like Dan said, it's a difference of, I don't know whether to say it's a subtle difference, because neither of these movies is subtle, but there's something to be said in how I think well the tone of this one works when you compare it to the first one, considering that they leaned that much harder into it. Like, it's almost to the point that if this was something else, I would say that they're forcing it, but I didn't feel that personally any of this felt forced, except for one scene that I'll bring up a little later.
Mm-hmm. And Nico, that's interesting insight from Blex. But
Yes, Blex.
I will
Jesus
say,
Christ.
I actually like the first film more than this one. I didn't necessarily like a lot of the campy moments in this one. I think what Dan felt about the first, I kind of felt about this, insofar as the mix wasn't just right for me and what I was looking at. And I will say as well, the one thing that stood out, Dan already mentioned it, but Ash takes a more central role in this one than he does in the first one, I would say. And they clearly have him overacting a lot of scenes in a real kind of like hipster, ironic way almost. Because there's the one with the bridge and like the bridge is out.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then he's like,
That was funny as shit.
oh my God.
I loved
Like,
how the fucking wrought iron parts of the bridge were like curled up in a fist, almost as if it was going. The bridge itself was like, no.
And then like when he gets to, you know, the Middle Ages and all the knights are like, oh, you're a hero. And he's like, no. I'm like, all right, bro. All right, calm down. Calm down, sir.
I feel like even his like facial expressions are just overacted, and
Yeah.
just everything he does is like cranked up to 11, you know?
It's almost like Jim Carrey-esque, but
Yes,
before
very
Jim
much,
Carrey.
yes. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed with that statement. Now, Nico, how do you like Ash as a protag?
I don't. Like, he's fine. And, I mean, he's hot, of course, and that's a huge part of it. He's hot and charismatic, but give me, like, 2 other character traits. I dare both of you.
Undead. Is that a character trait?
Okay, give me... Fair. Justin, you just got 1. All you need is 1.
Handless?
Is that really a character trait that he has only 1 operating hand?
He can't really play basketball that well anymore.
Hey, bro, tell me why this man has a chainsaw for a hand, and in the big fight, he's like punching the thing with his good hand. Like, dog, you have a chainsaw for a hand. Use it.
That's the sign of an absolute diva, though. Like, when you have a tool that is very clearly, like, the implement of your enemy's destruction clearly within your grasp, or in this case, it is his grasp. But, like, tell me how many different, like, anime we've watched where, like, it's the final battle. The hero has the enemy within his last breath of life, straining just to exist. He puts down his gun. They settle things with a fist fight. Metal Gear Solid 4, baby! Among others. You know I'm right.
Dan, Ash is a protagonist. Where are you at with that?
I don't think he's a very good protagonist. I think he's a
Thank
fun
you.
character. I like his character and everything. I like that he is everything we just described. But as far as like a protagonist, he's kind of a shit protagonist, I think. He makes dumb decisions. He's not particularly... There's nothing like really good about him. And like there's a point when he's possessed and then he is unpossessed. He goes back to normal and Annie's like still trying to kill him and he's like, no, I'm all right. I'm like, good. Annie should be trying to kill you. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
wanted to
the
stop
fuck?
trying.
Yeah. She should be. I don't know. So I think he's a bad protagonist, but a fun character.
Very true.
Agreed.
Very, very, very true. Now, question for the room here. So this has been described as a real top-class horror. This is a super cult classic. The first Evil Dead has its fans, but this is really where the ball gets rolling for the Evil Dead series. And what do you think? What makes this movie such a cult classic? Why do people keep coming back to it? And why is it so influential?
We've talked about this in past movies. I don't remember which ones, but I think my answer is going to be similar to what I remember saying in those, that I think the campiness and the over-the-topness of it and the effects, because there's so much practical effects, so many different, again, like eye candies and just so much cool stuff going on that's just so fun. And the fact that it doesn't take itself seriously. I think those qualities are really what make it a cult classic.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to agree. I would say this is one of those movies that if it's your thing and if you like it, it's really going to be your thing, I think. And in particular, like back then, because this movie came out in 1986 or 7, and that was kind of peak horror campiness, you know? Like you had so many campy horror movies coming out of the 80s, and I'm sure this kind of fit right in. And I don't know. I think it just stood out because of the violence. Because I remember reading that they thought it was going to get an X rating at first. And I don't know how much changes they made or anything else like that, but that was a thing for sure. And I think also just the character of Ash was such a big hit with people that they wanted more. Because you got to consider how many protagonists were like him back then. You know, like nowadays we see, I think, more protagonists like him, but back then, not so many.
What do you mean, protagonists like him?
Well, someone who is very much not a hero, someone who fucks shit up. He's vindictive at times. He's closer to the everyman than other protagonists, I feel like.
Okay.
And that's one thing that I think we see later on down the road. I think people are way more normal as it was in future films. But Nico, what'd you think?
So I think that this one is really just, you both mentioned sort of like elements of the decade, and I think considering this is in the latter half, again, 87 is when this came out, I feel like this is probably one of the highlights of the decade for a decade that's already known for movies like this or that are perhaps derivative of this. The biggest problem that I have with the movie is that they left in another scene. I don't want to say left in because obviously it was a choice, but like there's a scene where, similar to the first one, there is a woman who, Bobby Joe in this case, gets, let's just say this particular tree, it was a grape tree, if you get my drift. And they didn't go all the way quite nearly as they did in the first one, but like it's still basically the same scene for the same effect, and I just feel like that part was just unnecessary. Unless they were being like, this one is a literal, like all it is just a reference to the first one, which like I guess, but I don't know. I don't feel like you've kind of earned that.
I don't know. I disagree with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of scenes that are callbacks to the first. I mean, even with the basement and the times when like the monsters like popping out of the door to the basement and
the fruit cellar.
Yeah, the fruit cellar in this case. I think there's a lot of callbacks, and I think that this tree scene, tasteful is not the right way to say it because I don't think it could ever be tasteful, but it's much more manageable than the first movie. And I think that this one is not quite as overtly sexual and everything as it was in the first movie. And to me, this one is like acceptable amounts, in my opinion. Whereas the first one took it a little too far, I think.
IMO, much like an estuary, I contain elements of Nico's salt as well as Dan's fresh optimism. So hear me on
one
this.
of the better metaphors you've had in a while, I'm going to be honest.
I will say that when I saw the tree scene, I was like, boo, when I saw what was going down. Because I was like, you fucking did this already. You literally did this. And Dan is correct. Like I said earlier, this movie is very, very, very similar to the first. And there's a ton of callbacks and a ton of similarities. And I thought maybe, possibly, they might revisit the whole tree scene. And I also agree with Dan that this is, I think, a more acceptable tree scene. Now, again, I don't know if they toned it down or what they decided to do. I don't know if maybe there was an initial cut where it was
maybe
worse.
That's what merited the X rating. Maybe there was more to it. And like cards on
Perhaps.
the table, there's probably an actual answer to this out there somewhere. We just haven't done the digging that I'm sure some of you listening have. So if there's someone out there who's like, "Oh no, it was X-rated because blah blah blah," we don't have that knowledge. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I will also say, too, the whole like tree kind of thing, there's one part where I'm just like, it would have been totally fine, except for the whole part about like vines going into her mouth,
Yeah.
like it was Wicked City out this bitch. And I was like,
But it wasn't nearly that much. One goes into her mouth for like half of a second and it cuts, and then you don't ever see another one go into her mouth again.
correct, and that is true. But I kind of feel like there's the framing of it, and then it's like, we still got it in there. We're not going to go as far, but we still got it in there.
Sure.
And I was just kind of like, personally, I didn't see a point to it. I would have given them more points if the tree had just like ripped her into fucking quarters or something.
Agreed. Yeah.
I can see that.
I would have been like, hey, haha, I get it. Like the tree attacked her. Like, I don't know specifically why. I do know, but it always, in I think a modern lens, it always looks kind of bad when not for the first time, but in fact for the second time, you got a, female protagonist or whatever in your fucking film, and she's the only one that anything overtly sexual happens to ever at all forever. And I'm like, okay, all right there, champ. But, and this is a horrible transition, what's your favorite scene?
Not that one. So my favorite scene, Nico actually mentioned previously, is when Ash's hand gets possessed and he's just kind of laying down on the ground and his hand just starts like crawling towards a butcher's knife and he ends up cutting it off with a chainsaw. But I actually thought that was brilliantly acted.
Agreed.
And just the amount of control over your body, I guess, to like lay there perfectly still, except have your hand moving like it's its own entity, I thought was actually really well done. And that was a fun scene for me.
Mm-hmm. Nico, you have a favorite scene?
That was also my favorite scene because, like, I keep making references to Looney Tunes, but it is truly the only other property that is tonally okay. It may like Tom and Jerry, but like those are the best comparisons of the amount of sheer silliness that is in this movie. And I was waiting for Mel Blanc to just pop out of one of the cabinets with one of his classic lines or something, the amount of just campy silliness that was going on there, and it just made me smile.
My favorite scene in this film, it was probably the bridge scene, to be completely honest. Just like when he goes to see that the bridge is out and he's just like this epic, like, no, like that was probably my favorite part, to be honest. So taking it to the what would you do, it's difficult to find one considering this is very similar to the first film and I don't want to pose the same one again. So instead, I will ask you this. If you could come up with, I'm talking about from a writing perspective.
Okay.
If you could come up with a way to seal or defeat the Deadites that's not present in the movie, what would you say would be a cool way to do it?
Real long pole.
What?
Just like an actual 10-foot pole, just like keep them at bay. And if they get close, you just wallop them with it.
And that's going to defeat them?
I mean, it'll do a pretty good job. You don't know. I got the fucking skills like Keelik, my guy.
Oh, shit.
All right. Big pole ting.
You already know.
Yellow card. Dan, what do you think is a good way?
I would use fire.
Mm-hmm.
I would burn things to the ground. I would burn the whole fucking forest to the ground,
Yo,
to be honest.
real talk. When the trees start coming against you, like, it's done. We're all going up in a
Nico,
fucking crisp.
my God. Yellow card for you too. So I'm going to say this. My man talking about trees coming. Okay, bro, I got you. So.
I mean, that's basically pollen, so.
What?
Wow.
I'm not. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
I'm not.
All right, so let me bring some fucking class to this podcast.
Impossible.
Improbable.
I wonder if maybe because there's the whole passage about binding them to like flesh. So I wonder if you couldn't like combine what Dan was saying with this. So like if you bind the spirit to something that you can then like maybe burn alive and completely destroy, the spirit might also die. I think that could be a cool way to get rid of it personally. And there is a sequel, so maybe they do that in the sequel. I don't know. Because the year is 1987 and we don't know anything about a sequel, right guys?
Well, I think you do because you just said there's a sequel.
Well, then here's a question for the 2024 us. Which cabin would you rather be stuck in? The one from this or Cabin in the Woods?
Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cooler.
Yeah.
Fair. Probably has Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Indeed. Now, I want to take things to the critic review. Where do you guys think this ranks amongst critics on Rotten Tomatoes? What score do you think it has on the legendary thermometer?
I'm going to say it's low. I'm going to say like a 55. Just because I feel like cult classics get low scores from critics, but great scores from audience. So I'm going to say 55.
I'm going to go the complete other direction. I'm going to say 95.
Nico wins because this does in fact have an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critic score. Audience right in line with them at an 89%. But give me your thoughts. Give me your score. Where's this movie rank for you?
I enjoyed it. I had a blast with it. Again, like I've said a million times, I think it was just a fun movie to watch. I'm going to give it a 83.
Mm-hmm.
I liked all of this movie except for the one tree scene. I am also going to give this an 83.
I didn't like this movie very much, but I can see why people like it. This is almost like when you might go to a foreign country or something like that, and everyone there loves like a particular food, and then you eat it, and you're like, hey, yo, what the fuck is this? And that's kind of what this is. Like, if I served you guys fucking Karaili, you guys would be like, hey, yo, what the fuck is this? Like, why do you eat this?
Riley.
Trini food.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know. I don't appreciate how slapsticky this is in comparison to the first. I wanted it to be just a touch more serious. I can't take this movie seriously at all. And the pacing is kind of nutso sometimes because things just happen, but not a lot happens. And I would look upon this with much nicer eyes if A, this had been a first effort. It wasn't. It was a second effort, and they essentially made the same movie twice. And B, by this point in time, they had accrued more, how do I say, more cred in the industry, more juice, if you will. And I just personally think that they could have done a little bit better. They had fucking Stephen King big up this movie, bro, or the first one. So I would have expected a little bit more. So for me, this hits a 65, but I can definitely see why people like this because, again, if this is your stick, then you're going to fucking love it. Like, I feel the same way about this that I kind of do things like Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like, it's just not for me. I don't like it, but I can understand why people like it.
We should review that.
Should.
Maybe we will. But not right now, dear listener. So, guys, does this get a recommend from us?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I recommend it.
I would as well. But thanks to Justin, definitely not a golden seal.
I wasn't going to give it. There was no chance.
Fair enough. Well, if you like what you've heard if you want to shed some light on things, or if you want to tell Nico, hey, Nico, what's really good, bro? Hit us up. We're on X and Instagram at DOTD Horror. We're also on Facebook. Don't open that door. Plus, you can check everything we've done on our website, which is dotdhorror.com. But until next time, take care of one another. Make sure you have an alternate route out of your, surroundings that doesn't involve a bridge.
Yeah.
But as always, dear listener, don't open that door. Bye.